In this presentation, I will be talking about different instructional models, presentation tools, and universal design for learning. I am going to be modeling a lesson that I use that models the 5E model. The 5E model is used commonly in science classrooms. However, in my school district, any STEM-related subject or class is required to use the 5E model for all lesson plans. The 5E model is very easily explained that each of the 5 steps or pieces to the lesson begins with an E. The first part of the lesson is engagement, and this is your hook. So this is what gets kids excited to learn about the next topic or the next lesson. In my classroom, the engagement piece is always student-centered. I like them to get their own ownership of the topic and of the things to come so that they feel like they have a piece and something to share in the next phases. Next comes explore. This is where students might take some of the information they learned in the engagement and actually test it out. My kids know this is the struggle phase because I don't really give them a whole lot of information or a whole lot of direction, and I ask them to kind of figure it out for themselves. And they begrudgingly agree to the fact that they learn best when they struggle. And so this is lovingly known as the struggle phase in my classroom. The third phase is the explanation phase, and unfortunately in my class this a lot of times is the sit and get phase for my students. I plan to make this a lot more engaging in the future when I have the access to the technology to be able to use with the students one-on-one. Right now the internet reliability and the technology reliability is not very high in our district, and so it's kind of hard for me to put technology in the students' hands and base my lesson around it because it's not always going to work. The next 2 phases I have personally switched because normally for me, my students will create a project of some kind in the exploration and then continuing into the explanation phases, and we evaluate those projects. And then when we go back, we expand or elaborate on how or why that did or did not work, their project. And so I have switched these personally because that's how it looks in my classroom, but the standard 5E model is expansion and then evaluation. And in my classroom, the evaluation piece is normally a rubric of some kind. Sometimes it's a self-evaluation. I've also done peer grading where their grades are based off of what their peers thought of their project. And then the expansion or elaboration phase, like I said, could be going back and looking at why something didn't work out or why it did. This could also be a section for extra credit or connection to the real world. Because I like to think that my students get that a lot in my class, especially being a engineering and technology teacher. It's very real world, but sometimes they need that extra, this is what it looks like in the real world, kind of neon flashing sign, as I like to say. The lesson that I'm going to be looking at is from my Advanced Design Applications class. It is from our construction unit, and this class targets 11th and 12th graders. It is an advanced class, as it is in the name, and students must take and pass the entry-level class before they can take this one. I am currently teaching this class. We just finished the construction unit on Friday. So we went through all 5 of our lessons, which are called learning cycles in this class. And it also comes with a unit ending project, which my students just presented on Friday. The first learning cycle is what I'm going to focus in on, and it has to do with scale and drawing things either smaller or larger than they actually appear in real life. And the learning objectives for this learning cycle or this lesson are that the students can explain the different scales and be able to convert different measurements in those scales, and then also to develop a design and create a scale drawing and scaled three-dimensional model of that design. Now, this class takes the 5E model and kind of changes it around even more. And so we go from exploration to reflection to engagement to expansion to evaluation. And as I unfold how this lesson takes place, you'll understand why we kind of move away from the traditional 5E model as it's written. The first piece of this learning cycle is exploration. And the students get a architect's scale in their hand. An architect's scale is a six-sided ruler. You can see it in the picture there, and each side of the ruler is a different scale, which allows you to either multiply the size of something or shrink the size of something. And they measure different lines to figure out their lengths. They measure different shapes to figure out their area. They also have to draw different lines in this section. And this section ends with students creating an orthographic drawing. And an orthographic drawing is a three-viewed or a multi-view drawing where they take the object, whatever it is that they're drawing, and they draw it from three different angles. And these are things that are currently used in architecture all around the world. Students then reflect on this process. So they go through the exploration phase with a lot of figure it out, good luck. They get a packet that kind of explains what scale it is and what the different sides of the ruler mean, but I don't really give them a whole lot of direction on which side of the ruler to use or how to read it. So then they reflect on this process. And so they have to kind of look at what they did and figure out how they knew what to do or why they knew what to do or why they did something. And so some of this is also a little bit of a review from the previous class that they had to take before taking this one, because we do cover scale and orthographic drawing in that class as well. But the three questions they have to reflect on are: how did you determine the appropriate scale to use? And how many different scales did you attempt to use before you found the one that works best? Why does the placement of the three views on the paper matter in relation to the orthographic drawing? And what details did you choose to add to your drawing and why? Students then take that reflection and that understanding of scale and orthographic drawing, and they actually get to create something in the engagement section. So the construction unit is based on a final project that all of the learning cycles or lessons build to. To assist the creation of this final project. And the final project is a full development plan with commercial and government buildings, and then single-family homes, multi-family homes. They have to plan the roads, the whole nine. So the first thing that they do for this project is actually create a welcome sign, as if you would find at the beginning of a development or the entrance to any shopping center, with the name of the shopping center and kind of what they can find there. And so they are given a scale, and they have to create a orthographic drawing and then actually create a three-dimensional object that they will use. And this actually becomes a part of their final presentation. And this gets affixed to their board. The board would, in the end of the unit and at the end of their presentation, would have all of the pieces of the development very clearly laid out. And so the kids are given full access to paper and paint and markers and colored pencils and wood and tools, and they cut and sand and glue and paint for a couple of days until they have these signs created. For me, in my class with Advanced Design Expansion, is extra credit. In these learning cycles, the expansion section is the connection to the real world, and how does this mirror something that you might do in this job somewhere else. Granted, most of these things are very real world, very accessible for students to understand, but sometimes they don't really understand the full scale. So one of the things that they can do is find a building on the internet, a scale drawing of a building. And I normally challenge them, if they're going to do this, to try to find the blueprints for our school, because that is public information. You can find them on the internet. And that's something that they don't really understand, and it's something that they learn that's new, that they could know exactly how large the faculty room bathroom is if they really cared, which for some students is interesting, and for other students, they just care that, you know, there's another 6 inches that they could have in their locker if they do the math right. And so if they take the time to do these things, they do get extra credit. During this first learning cycle, I don't normally get a whole lot of kids that take me up on this extra credit. They'd rather spend the time on their welcome sign and making that fun and cool and more detailed than the group next to them, as if it's some kind of a competition to see who can have the best sign. But eventually I do have a couple of kids that get into some trouble with their grades and have to go back and find those extra credit pieces and do a couple of those to earn those points to bring their grade up at the end of the semester. And so I normally get a couple of takers that go back and take me up on finding a blueprint on the internet, because that sounds pretty easy. But once you get into some of the other stuff, it's very interesting and very detailed. And this learning cycle ends with a rubric. Everything in my class is graded based on a rubric. This one has 4 sections. The exploration phase, so how well did they actually use the ruler and the scale and create orthographic drawing. The engagement piece, did they work well in a group? Was their sign fully created? Does it meet all the criteria? And the inventor's logbook entries, which is our reflection section, I call that the inventor's logbook, as kind of a nod to Thomas Edison, because we do a small lesson on Thomas Edison and his journals and how he kept his journals at the beginning of this class. We also talk a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci, and how both men went to extreme measures to keep their thoughts and ideas secret and sacred only to them, by writing upside down and backwards into a mirror, by writing invisible ink, those kinds of things. So we try to mirror that as much as possible. And then the final part is preparing for the challenge, which would be our unit challenge or our final design challenge at the end of the unit. Just as they're working to make sure that they are continuing to prepare for that eventual challenge or that eventual project. And I believe that this learning cycle fits all of the UDL principles, mostly because the students work at their own pace. I hand them this packet and I say, okay, you have to work in your groups. When you get to this section, and when you're done with this packet, there's another one to follow it. So when your group is done, bring it up. Let me have it. I'll give you the next one. So they can kind of work at their own pace. When the rest of their group is ready, they can skip ahead and work on that group work and then go back and finish the individual work at the end if they need to. Especially those kids who work ahead or finish early, because I definitely have a few of those. They are given the opportunity for extra credit, which the extra credit opportunities give them the ability to go out and see those real world connections and make more real world connections if necessary or available to them. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. These are all of the resources that I used. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.